Welcome, dear listeners, to another captivating episode of the Greenside Podcast, where we delve into the stories and insights of creative minds shaping the landscapes we inhabit. I'm your host, Graciela Martin, and today we have a fascinating guest. Her name is Pearce Butcher, a talented landscape designer based in Greenville, South Carolina. Pearce shares her journey from growing up in the South, bouncing between states, to finding her passion for landscape design. This talented guest, whom you'll hear more about shortly, has even launched a Domestika course, showcasing the artistry behind landscape design. In our interview, we explore how this artist shapes landscapes, blending textures, colors, and design principles to craft unique and sensory-rich environments. If you're enjoying the Greenside Podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts to stay updated on our inspiring episodes. And for those who want to support the podcast, consider buying us a coffee with the link in the description. Your contributions help us continue bringing you these incredible stories. Now, let's dive into my conversation with Pearce Butcher. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Greenside Podcast. Today, I'm really excited. I have a very special guest, and her name is Pearce Butcher. Welcome, Pearce. I'm so excited to have you, and I'm just going to have you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Graciela. I'm so glad to be here and chat with you. So my name is Pearce, and I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I grew up in the South, kind of lived all over North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We bounced all over the country, and now we're back in Greenville. And I'm a landscape designer.
Very cool. I actually found you on Instagram, and you were doing just these beautiful color renderings, and it was just really inspiring. I always love seeing people doing those hand renders because it's just I feel like it's a lost art, and it's a lot of fun. And I always I think living vicariously through that through those Instagram posts. And you actually have now a Domestika course, which congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, so they actually found me because of the color rendering too. And my take on the color rendering is, so I was an art major in college, and then I learned hand drafting, and I was doing hand drafting for years and years, and enjoyed the process, like the artistic process of, drafting by hand and architectural lettering. But then I found a software program that made me much more efficient. And I loved everything about the software, except you're in front of your computer all the time. You're not actually drawing and coloring and creating that work of art by hand. So it was really just my way to still kind of put my stamp on finished landscape design, and to make it a little bit more personal and just have fun. It is fun to color. It's a little bit tedious, but you just have this, everyone is different. Each design is different, and it just allows you to kind of present this 2D work of art to your clients. It's also this 3D work of art once it's installed. So that is my take on the rendering. A lot of people are still like, why don't you just use the software to color your drawings? It does have that capability, but it's just fun. Like you said, it's fun, it's beautiful, and it just allows you to be a little bit more hands-on too. So that is what the Domestika course taught from beginning to end. We taught hand drafting and rendering at the end. And then we also brought in my background of fine art to teach the basic principles of design and how to apply those to the landscape.
My heart sings when I hear that, because fine art and landscape design. And that's why, if you guys are listening or watching this on YouTube, you can see my fine art in the background. Because when I was taking the course, you were actually walking, everyone through how to design or how to view landscape design through a fine art lens. And so you actually kind of dissect a few fine art pieces that are not even necessarily landscape paintings. Like they're, of one, the name, the Claude Monet one where, she's in the wind and the, umbrella, and the one with the ballerina. And so I was so inspired by that. And because I think I told you this before in our intro call, that I love that play Sunday in the Park and George Seurat, where he painted Damien. And so I love that. And can you talk a little bit more about just that fine art and landscape design sort of marriage a little bit?
Absolutely. Like I think of it as an experience. I think when you go to a museum and you're standing in front of those works of art, it is an experience. You are taking it in. There is the painter very specifically creates this composition to draw your eye in one place, and then it goes through the piece very intentionally because of the lines on the canvas and the light and the shadow and the movement. And each, even abstract works of art, are going to give you a feeling, either a piece or like it's going to have a mood to it, right? It's going to have like energy or peacefulness or anger or the juxtaposition of different like soft colors or harsh colors. I think about the experience of standing in front of a work of art in the composition. And then I also think of that as a 3D work of art. When you are like in a sculpture garden, you are taking in that work of art, you're walking around it, you're seeing the light and the shadow and the shape and the form. And so I truly think of the gardens we create. We are creating experiences for people. We are creating different experiences by the different types of pathways we design. If it's this narrow pathway with a very solid surface that goes in a straight line, you're going to move really quickly through that on that pathway because it might feel uncomfortable if it's very narrow, but think of it, it's a wide, winding path with pea grapple. That's a totally different experience. It's still a pathway, but your experience through that garden along that path is going to be different. And so we as designers get to shape this experience for people as they move through that garden. And obviously the same thing with plants. Or do we have, like, think of the different experience. If you have like a very aggressive Burford holly next to a driveway, like you are not going to spend much time there. That is a very like, it's covered in thorns. It's very dense and heavy, as opposed to if you have a garden full of ornamental grasses that are blowing in the wind that you just want to run your hands through. I like to joke that I think every garden should be a sensory garden. I want things that you want to touch and smell and like pick off a little leaf of lavender and pinch it and smell it. And so that experience too, like we as sculptors create, this is one of the quotes, I think I read it from Piet Oudolf. Sculptors create art out of mass. We are creating art out of the void. So we are creating art that people move through, whereas the sculptors are creating art out of mass that people walk around. So that's my little take on, I really truly think that like we are artists in what we create because we get to create experiences for people.
Absolutely. And landscape design offers just so many different mediums for like, especially you as an artist who has that background. There's texture, there's just, I feel like there's just different kinds of paintbrushes you could use in a landscape design and create a beautiful experience for people. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have, we talked a little bit about, yeah, your background, but can you tell us a little bit more about just about where you went to school and, even why you decided to do art in school and
Mm-hmm.
kind of how that led you to landscape design?
So I feel like I was always a little bit of a wild child. I loved being outside. Like I feel like one of my earliest memories is like literally finding a pile of bricks under the deck and building something with it and feeling very like energized by like creating something out of something. Like I loved Legos, but I also loved to like paint and draw and just like not just create things, out of like blocks and Legos, but just like also just drawing, painting. My parents put me in art classes when I was little, and I was never that great at it. Like, okay, side story, I think it was in middle school, I had one like silly drawing of a beach, like put in a citywide art show. And I was so honored. So we went to this art show and we looked and looked and looked and looked for this painting that I was very proud of, or this drawing.
Mhm.
They had hung it upside down. That's why we
No.
couldn't find it. So I'm not saying I was a good artist. I just enjoyed it. And I always enjoyed taking art classes. So I decided and I also grew up going to summer camp in North Carolina in the mountains. I feel like that was a big part of, like, it became part of my personality, just like spending the summers in the woods, like again, just being the wild child, like roaming, playing in the creeks and, building forts in the trees and just loved being outside. So then I decided to go to college in Greenville, South Carolina, where we are now. I didn't grow up here, but I went to Furman University and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, I guess I'll be an art major because I know I'm not going to do chemistry and I'm not interested in accounting. Because, and so I was like, I'll just be a fine art major if I'm not great at it. And then I think it was actually my mother. I think it was like a freshman or sophomore. She goes, there's a job where you get to design the outdoors. It's called landscape architecture. And I was like, Really? That sounds perfect. And I could have transferred to like Clemson was the closest one. They have a landscape architecture program, but I really loved my school. I loved where I was. So I decided to take on a second major in environmental science. So I was now a double major in art and environmental science. And then I did an internship after my junior year in college with a woman-owned landscape design build firm outside of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So I worked for them. It was great. I really loved working for them. Ended up working for them right after I graduated from college, so I got married right after I graduated too. So I went from being a college student and then a bride, and then I was spraying Roundup for them. That was my first job.
Wow.
Was like going to people's yards and spraying Roundup and pulling plant pictures and answering the phone and like doing
Wow.
I mean, we're talking like paid. I mean, it was a great, I am not complaining. It's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Like you just have to start at the bottom. And I learned so much from them. And I would go to the nurseries and like they would teach me like how to pick out plants for an upcoming installation and why one, like how to just kind of how to take a finished plan. I wasn't designing at that point. I was just working for them. And then like pick out all the plants for the job that's coming and just help set them out. And just really, they just kind of took me under their wing and I did whatever they needed me to do. But then also when I was living in DC, there was a program at George Washington University for your landscape design graduate certificate. So it's for working professionals who already had their undergrad, and you take classes at night in their downtown campus. And then you also take horticulture classes like on the weekends. And a lot of them were at the National Arboretum, which was so fun.
Wow.
So just really wonderful teachers. So that took about 3 years. So 3 years kind of go to class at night and on the weekends. So I earned my landscape design graduate certificate from George Washington University. So that was
Wow.
my path. And so it is kind of funny to think that like I really have been doing this since that would be maybe like 1998. I graduated from college in '02. So that was a long time ago. So I got my graduate
Nice.
certificate in '05. So
Wow. And so you get a graduate landscape design certificate over there?
yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't have my master's in landscape architecture. I, but I felt like it was a good fit because I got to it was much more residential focused, and that's what this company that I worked for, they did almost all residential projects, and I just really enjoyed that process. I enjoyed like getting to know people and just the smaller scale of it and the more personalized aspect of doing residential design. And so that's what I decided to stick with. But my story is not that linear because I also so remember I got married in '02, right after graduating college. And then when I was presenting my graduate project, I was also pregnant with my first child. So I gave birth in '05, right when I got my graduate certificate, and then again in '07. And we moved for my husband's graduate school. And so I really I took a lot of years off to raise babies and would like very infrequently pick up a job here and there for people that needed freelance landscape designer. And I remember those years being very hard raising babies, but I don't regret it. But it was I kind of had this large gap in landscape design productivity while I was raising my children. And then once they were in school, as my children grew, my business grew at the same time. So the more they were in school, the more work I was able to take on. And then once they were in school full time, I was pretty much working full time as well. So that's kind of how my path went. It's not quite as linear as it sounds.
Well, I mean, usually it's not, right? It's like you just keep going and taking the next step and then figuring out where you're going to land. And so I think that your story could really inspire a lot of people maybe who are also doing life, and then just trying to figure out if landscape design or landscape architecture is what can work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really love about your path is that you went to George Washington University, which is, a pretty prestigious university. And you not only went to a really neat school for that, but then you also got to get some horticulture experience at the Arboretum,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, that's got to, what was a day to day at school like for you?
So our classes, the horticulture class would be like, I think they were like 3 hour chunks, like once a week. So you would spend like 3 hours like walking the garden and like we had, I think it was 4 semesters, each semester, like throughout a 12-month period. So each semester would focus on the plants that were like in season. like, for example, so like in the winter, we studied conifers and hollies. But then in the springtime, we're studying a lot of like, that's when we would focus on hydrangeas and azaleas and the things that are in bloom at that point at that. So I have I still have all my notebooks of, we would just get plant lists and descriptions of the plants, and we would be like learning like the entire genus of ilex for a semester and trying to learn how to ID them and tell them apart from each other and understand what their value in the landscape and how to like which ones you would choose for each design, and just really try to dive deep into trying to pick the right plant for the right location. So it's definitely changes your perspective from just walking a nursery, because these are massive specimens. So when you would think like, it's almost like you have to change your mindset a little bit, because you're like, oh, an American holly. Well, that one was 80 feet tall and 30 feet in diameter, but it had been in the National Arboretum for probably, 50 years. So you got to see these very mature specimens in the landscape, which was helpful in one aspect, but also like you had to kind of dial it back a little bit when you're trying to design a residential landscape, because obviously these are going to be, much smaller trees and
Right.
shrubs when they go in the ground, but also trying to think long term at the same time.
Exactly, which helps you, I think about that, because landscape design is it's what do they call it? Like it's a living. We're talking about like living things. We're talking
Mhm.
about landscapes, plants. They are not like nuts and bolts that we put in metal or things like, I don't know how architecture uses their terms, but these things
Yeah,
are not
they're not static.
organisms. Exactly, they're not static. So yeah, I think that that's a really good exercise for landscape design principles. And
Mhm.
I know, like when I was volunteering at the Fairchild Botanical Gardens here in Miami, and when I was there, it was such an eye opener, because I was like, wait, these are plants that are so native to the environment, but
Mhm.
they're in an environment where they're highly manicured. They're not manicured, but they're taken care of
Right.
very much. And so you think, well, this is just going to be sitting here in someone's like in a garden, and it doesn't have to. We can just let it grow wild. But in reality, it's very different, and you have to take care of these things. You have to,
Mhm.
and there's a whole process with these living organisms, and so
Mhm.
you have to kind of think about that when you're using that to design. But and so in that experience you had, at the arboretum and things like that, what kind of prompted you to think like, okay, I want to start my own business? Was that early on, or was that later on down the road?
I think it was more just I when we decided we wanted to have a family and I wanted to stay home, it was more kind of a default. It was like, well, I know that I'm not ready to go work for a firm and, put in 40 to 60 hours a week. But I can do this on the side when I have a little bit of time here and there when the kids are little. And so it was more of just starting very small. I think though we moved back to Greenville. So we lived in Phoenix, Arizona for a short time. I did not do any design out there just because it was so different. The environment and even the design was so different. So we moved back to Greenville in 2015. And everything again, I was like, oh, this is all familiar again. I would love to start designing again. Like I just felt like I was back home, if you will, at least like on the East Coast, like with all the plants that I knew. And so I was like, I have a drafting table. Like, let's try this. I've got some vellum stored that I still have a roll of. Let's try. So I put a message out on Nextdoor, which is like such like the depths of humanity. And I got like one person in my neighborhood who needed a backyard design. And so I just started very small and, would maybe do I don't know, maybe a project a month. And then it was mostly word of mouth, but also I would cold call contractors. When I first got started, when I first moved back to Greenville, I would notice the landscape contractor trucks driving around town, the ones that I would see most frequently. And I just cold called them and said, hey, my name is Pearce. I'm a freelance landscape designer. Do you have a landscape designer on staff? Would you ever want to outsource any of your design work to me? And also, like, I have clients. Would you like to be on my preferred contractor list? And so I started a relationship that way, saying, like,
Wow.
would you want to install other people's designs? Like, could I refer you to my clients? And also, would you ever like me to do some freelance work for you? And interestingly, like most of these guys, did not have a designer on staff. They were doing it in their quote free time, which I can't even imagine like running a landscape, a design or like an installation. So they were doing, they would have like a maintenance crew and an installation crew. And then the owners were like designing on the side, and it's not like they couldn't do it. They were very good at it. But when they found out I could just do it for them, they were more than happy to outsource that to me. They would be like, yes, please, here's my customer's name. Give them a call. You did the design and just hand it back to me when you're done. And so that's really kind of how I built my business here in town, was just reaching out to contractors, and sometimes even like especially once I learned the software and had that really professional looking finished product, like I got calls from people who were just at a nursery and saw another guy holding one of my plants and was like, who did you get to do that? I need someone to do that. And so they would just write down my name and give me a call, because they were just, I just feel like there's a void in the market of people who just can draft a professional plan that then makes the contractors' lives easier, because it's legible, it's labeled, it's done to scale. I have the plant picture catalog for the clients, then the plant list for the contractors and materials list. So I think it just became a mutually beneficial relationship where the contractors could outsource that to me. And yeah, and then I don't have to run a crew. So it's kind of a win-win for me too, because I feel like they're doing the hard work. I'm doing the fun work. I
Yeah.
joke that, like, I draw the pictures, I don't dig the holes. So
Exactly. But you create really great relationships with these contractors that I'm sure are so happy to have you, outsourcing all of that landscape design. And I don't know, I just think that communicating with landscape contractors can be, complicated at times, but to be able to just have that relationship with them knowing that you're the designer and
mhm.
you're here to sort of provide that what they need, and then they just do the work for you. And it also cuts out the client talking to the contractor. Or I think it's a little bit different if a contractor comes and they're like, I'll do the landscape design, but it's nice to have an artist in there and just kind of communicate whatever ideas you might have. And
Yeah, that's
um
a good point. And I think too, I think we all bring different things to the table. And I think
yes.
just showing up at a construction site or at a homeowner's property, just with that mutual respect and understanding of just finding the contractors that appreciate you as a designer for
Mhm.
what you can bring to the table. And then also appreciating them for their construction expertise too. So like, I feel like sometimes I have to tell my contractors, like, you won't hurt my feelings. Like, I need you to tell me if something I designed didn't work. And like 95% of the time, they're all so kind and willing to work with me, and will tell me like, hey, that wasn't a great plant because it's actually invasive. I'm like, thank you for telling me. That's great. Or like, I'll say, hey, I have this crazy idea. If we like drop the grade here and put a retaining wall here and move this here, like, what do you think? Like, I think this would make their space work a lot better, but like, can you build it? And so they'll either say, love it, let's figure it out. Like, I had a contractor actually call the city and move a telephone pole because of my crazy idea to like drop the grade and move their driveway and like make the flow between the inside and outside of their home work a lot better. So like, those are my favorite conversations, is like
Wow.
just having the contractors who are willing to like listen to my big ideas and
Great.
then like figure out how to build them. And I obviously I want it to be practical. I don't want to come up with an idea that's, completely unreasonable from the financial side of it. But anyway, I just think it's fun when the contractors appreciate us and the different way that we can look at a site and kind of analyze
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, and sort of like even just managing expectation, because I feel like contractors are some that I've worked not closely. Well, yeah, actually I have worked closely with. I have talked to contractors directly, and it's always just like, how could they do that? What are they doing? Da, da, da," And they're just like expressing just a frustration. And you're like, I'm sorry, but that's the way that they designed it. Let's try to figure out a way. And so it's always just
Hmm.
kind of complicated but it's nice to hear that you found someone locally that is willing to communicate and be honest and respect what you do. And I actually was talking to a couple of other people yesterday about that, where, landscape architecture and landscape design, like, wasn't a respected,
Hmm.
degree, or wasn't a respected career for a long time. And it's just sad because it is such a huge aspect of the human experience, like when we go
Hmm.
outside and enjoy nature. And a lot of a big part of it is collaborating with other
Hmm.
disciplines, collaborating with people, talking to people, developing good relationships. And I think that your business is a really good example of that. And I thought what was interesting about your story was that you were able to see sort of a hole or a gap in what was needed in South Carolina.
Mhm.
And so how many designers are there locally, since you noticed that gap?
I would say so we're like a medium-sized city. We're, like, geographically right between, Charlotte and Atlanta. I'm right off of 85, and we're maybe a third the size. Again, my brain doesn't work in numbers. I'm a designer, but, like, we're not a tiny city, like a tiny town.
Right.
We have an airport. We're a decent sized city. We're
Right.
growing. I would say I could probably name 6 off the top of my head that I would say were probably contemporaries. There's 2 other girls who are running similar businesses to me. There's a couple, like, larger firms that are doing it that are full scale design build, like, super high end, and, I would say probably about, like, 6 really good ones. And then a lot of, again, a lot of the landscape contractors sometimes will just do little small scale stuff in-house.
Right.
But I kind of at this point prefer to do the larger projects. Like I prefer to do like little front yards at this point kind of are really worth my time. I'd rather like let the landscape contractor, like, you don't need to design. You know, for foundation plants, like they can do that. You can, save your time. But if we're talking about like full master plans, outdoor entertaining areas, pools, like especially new construction is really fun too when you get to like lay out the driveway and like really figure out the total connectivity between the indoor and outdoor space really well. Like what exactly is that view from the sitting area? Like what's your view from the master bedroom each morning? Like what does it look like for looking out when you're sitting at the kitchen sink? Right now, those are kind of my favorite projects. It's just being able to take on a project as a whole and think through just the full scale master plan. Those are my favorite.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what is like when you approach a site, what are your principles? Like, what is the first thing that you do when you approach a site?
Well, it's the first thing I like to do is to meet with the homeowner at their property and walk with them and ask some questions and tell them about your family. How do you want to use this space? Like, what do you guys like to do? So that's going to be a totally different yard if it's, a retired couple who loves to they want a cutting garden and an herb garden as opposed to like a young family whose kids are really into sports. So
Right.
like those, it could be the same property, but those are going to be two different gardens because of the way that these people are going to use the space. So those are my first questions. I always want to know like who you are, and then like what do you love, what works about the space if it's not new construction, if it's existing landscape, like what works, what parts do you love, and what are your pain points right now? What's not working? Is there a drainage issue? Is there like do we need to screen the neighbors? Like, do you not have a level playing space for your kids? Like, do we need to put in retaining walls? Just find out like what the problems are and then come up with solutions. So it's also a lot of just like listening and problem solving that we get to do as
Mm,
well. It's like listening to what's working, what's not, how they want to use the space, and just really finding like the best use for their space as possible. I
right.
kind of think of ourselves as like I know landscape architecture is our term, but I almost think of it more as like outdoor architecture. I
Mm,
say, like, of course I love plants, but the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out the floor plan. If you're designing a house, the first thing you do is figure out how many people are going to live there. How do you want to use the space? Let's pick out a floor plan before we pick out pillows and paint colors and drapes. Like, so I think about our job is first and foremost, how big are those spaces going to need to be? How do they all flow together? And then what are they made of? Like hardscape, lawn, trees, shrubs. So we're kind of building these outdoor rooms from the ground up and out.
yes, like what you said, it's kind of you're designing spaces that are not built, that are not static, but
Mhm.
yeah, with living organisms and trying to, yeah, I think that that's a really good way to talk to the client and figure out what problems do we need to solve, and then how can we create a beautiful space with that. You get to talk to the client directly. Working at a firm where I didn't know who the client was, I didn't know what we were doing. It was like I was given a plan. I didn't know why are we doing what we're doing, and what
Mhm.
does the client want? What's in their minds, what's in their vision. I remember someone telling me that is that if you really want to love what you do, you have to believe in the projects. And I'm like, that makes total sense now. And I think that with your business, you get to do that every day. which is like huge. It's such a privilege.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think I will admit, like at first, like being a stay-at-home mom for so long and like feeling very insecure in that, feeling like I was the only girl at a construction site, which happened multiple times. At first, I felt like it was anyway, I finally had to readjust my thinking is that this is not a liability, it's an asset. Like understanding like
Mm,
sometimes women have a higher emotional intelligence than men. And I think our ability to listen really well and to ask those good questions makes us good designers. We are not going to come in there. I'm not going to come in there and just like every yard that I design does not look the same. Like, I'm not going to say,
right.
well, you just need to have a garden full of azaleas and gardenias and boxwoods. Because that's what it looks like in the South, and that's what your neighborhood needs to have. Like, no, like if they tell me they hate the color peach and hate azaleas, fine, we're not going to put them in there. Like,
Yeah.
it's your yard. And so
Yeah.
I think our gift as women to really listen and lean into people is makes us really good designers.
I love that. A high EQ.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Yeah. It's so funny that you bring that up because I was literally just thinking about that today. I was like, yeah, I mean, it's one thing to be able to look at a site and have this technical, mindset. But there's another thing to be able to connect with people in order to accomplish their vision. And
Mm-hmm.
I think of my mom. I mean, I brought her up like twice now in
Right.
interviews, and it's just like she just has a vision. Like she looks at something, she knows what she wants, and she can look at a disheveled like shack and be like, "Oh, this house has so much potential," and I'm like, "What?" But it's true. She just can. For you, I guess, you talked a little bit about how the hand sketching, hand rendering, you offer that sort of as like your handprint to the client. And so you have so many followers on Instagram about this, and do you ever get questions from them too, just people who are outside the industry?
I definitely get people asking, like, "Where did you go to school? How do you do this? Like, how like is this? I didn't realize this was a profession." Some of them tend to be like out of the U.S. and they're asking, like, "How do I? Can you teach me this?" And so I can answer that two ways. One, I can teach design and rendering. The hard part about a profession, like, think of it as opposed to like interior design. You could learn interior design online all day long learn about textures and fabrics and like we said, like layouts and floor plans. But our extra little thing that we have to learn is the horticulture aspect of it. And that changes from region to region. You drive 100 miles and you're gonna have to choose different plants than you would in where I am located here. So I think that's the one extra challenge in our profession is really understanding the plant material. And so I tell people, okay, if you want to get started in this industry, go work at a nursery for a year. Go locally, work at a nursery, get your hands on, like see what's coming in each season and really get to know those plants well for your location. And then the design part can be taught. The plant knowledge has to kind of be absorbed, but then the design aspect of it, you can learn. You can learn online. I also suggest people also just spend time outdoors in public spaces and other gardens and to understand what we talked at the beginning. Look down at your feet. What are you walking on? How does that feel? Look at the rise and the run of a step outside and does it feel natural? Different rise and run of a step is going to move you through that space differently. Like look at the handrails, look where people gather in public spaces. I always think that's so fascinating. Human-centered design and realizing where people gather and why and trying to understand that and then creating kind of obviously you have to bring that down to a residential scale, but it's still definitely good information to absorb. So those are kind of the three things that I suggest to people if they want to get into this is learn your plants, go spend time in outdoor spaces and see what you like and you don't like, and then learn the basics of design and then drafting either digital or hand drafting.
Man, I just learned so much from that just now. I think that's great advice. Are there books that you ever give to young designers or people who's interested in learning more about what you do that you would recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm looking at my stack right now. There's one. Okay, one of them that is my favorite. Oh, hold on just a minute. I have it right here. So I don't mess it up. Okay. It's kind of an older book. I think you can find it on Amazon. I don't know if it's still in print. but it's called Timeless Landscape Design, and it's by Durgan and Durgan, which are a husband and wife team of landscape architects. I think they started in Atlanta, and now they live in Cashers or Highlands, North Carolina. And I learned so much from this book, and it does a great job about breaking down the steps like we talked about and breaking down the different parts of a design that you would like, the approach, the focal points, line and shadow. And anyway, it's a real, this is not have the cover on it anymore. There's another great one, kind of talking about what we talked about earlier too. I think it's called The Artful Garden by Piet Oudolf. Don't know if I said that right. That one is really good too. And it talks a lot about like the garden as art and experience and moving and texture and color. And that one's really good too. I like that one. And there's a lot of technical books as well. There's landscape graphics. There's a big like landscape architecture textbook that does a good job too. It's very dense, but it's just called Residential Landscape Architecture. See, I'm looking at it. Design process for the private residence. So I can send you those links if you want.
Yeah.
But those are some good ones to get started.
Yeah, and your Domestika course, listeners, please go and check that out. I have learned from that already, and I went to school for it, so there's always more to learn if you feel like, oh, I don't want, no, there's more to learn. And there's a design process that Pearce has that, I've learned a lot from already. And that's the truth. So go and check out that. You give book recommendations too, and materials, which, by the way, is not taught anymore, at least that I know of. The architectural lettering and, like using your teeth, like,
yeah,
that's not taught anymore.
Really? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Are you learning CAD in school now too? Is that what they teach you in landscape architecture
They
school?
learn you. Well, I think it depends on which program you come from. I have learned, and I'll shout out to Purdue. I've only ever worked directly with Purdue interns
Okay.
at the firm I was before, but I feel like they come out with school with like very prepared. The school that I went to, I think they're more focused on big scale, large scale, sort of concepts. And so we never really got into, and more graphics related. So Illustrator, that kind of graphic representation, diagramming, things like that. So there wasn't necessarily a focus on even residential design or, hand lettering or even hand graphics. So we did learn CAD, but there wasn't even really much. There was a class, but it was just one towards the end of the semester. And so I came out of school, working with people who have been in the industry for 15 years, 15, 30 years. And I felt like they had this different side to their brain that I was just like, I wish I had learned that. Do you feel like, I don't know, do you feel like it's helped you a lot in your design process and how you sort of think through designing people's spaces, just learning these more, I don't want to say technical, but I guess more technical, like using architectural lettering and stuff, that is just not taught anymore.
I definitely think one of the big benefits of hand drafting is because obviously you're drawing on a much larger, you're drawing on your drafting table, normally like 24 by 36-inch sheet of paper. And like drawing out bed lines like that is a whole different experience than clicking on a computer. And I feel like I was able to create these really soft, fluid, dynamic landscapes with a pencil before I ever inked it in on a different mindset. You just like think about the space differently when you're sketching with a pencil than you do like trying to figure it out like on the computer where your lines go up, down, sideways. Like, so sometimes I'll even create my base plan in CAD, which is the base plan is a million times easier than drawing it by hand. But the actual like artistry of it is obviously a lot harder on the computer. So sometimes I will print out that base plan. I actually have a printer in my house now, a giant plotter. And then sometimes I'll print it to scale. Sometimes I'll just print it on an 8.5 by 11. So I can just use that pencil, that soft pencil, and kind of sketch those ideas out on paper by hand before I put that information back in the computer. So it's kind of almost a little bit of more of a hybrid approach too to design, because I just feel like when you have those beautiful soft curves of your lawn, anyway, I feel like that makes a really beautiful yard too. It's just trying to work through the design ideas by hand before you just let CAD design it for you. So
Yes. And you talked a little bit about on your Domestika course where you get your inspiration. And you brought up the Biltmore House. And I went there and there are places that I go to that no one asks, but I'm like, did you know that Frederick Law Olmsted designed this, the father of
mhm,
landscape architecture?
mhm.
And so, can you talk a little bit about just why that specific place is important to you?
I just think he just does such a fabulous job, well, with the experience of getting on that road, and he designed it is not a straight line. It is very intentionally very windy, so you are going slowly. You go over bridges that he built. You'll go around a corner, and then you have a surprise, like, grouping of something here, and you go around the corner here, and you're just surrounded by trees, and it feels very natural and woody. It's full of hemlocks and rhododendron and azaleas, and then all of a sudden, you come out of the trees and boom, there's this castle. There's this giant French style chateau that has perfect axial symmetry, and it's very formal. So it goes from very informal to very formal very quickly. And I just think the experience of that is so fascinating. And I love how he didn't just design a garden, he designed this huge scale property, and then he terraced it. I love how, like, you have your main level of the grand lawn in the front, and then there's like a retaining wall, and it steps down to, I think it's a little bit of a Japanese garden because I know it had some really cool Japanese maples and stuff. And then you step down again and you have your perennial garden, and then lower down the property you have the bass pond. So the farther you away you get from the house, the more organic and natural it is. It's still a design landscape. He still designed this. He designed the roads and the ponds and the bridges and the dam, but it feels very natural the farther you get away from the house. And so I think he did a great job with focal points and symmetry and using formal design principles of French gardens, but then also very natural for that environment. The further you get out to the woods, it feels you're in North Carolina. It feels like you're in the woods, and I just love going there so much because I feel like if I have plants that I love and then I see them there and I'm like, that's why I love that plant. There are the red twin dogwoods in the winter with snow underneath them. And that's the exact experience that I want people to have in their own garden when I plot one back in the corner because I think that's such a cool plant. So it's so fascinating. I love that place. When we lived out in Arizona and people would be like, I've never been to the East Coast before. And I'd be like, go to Asheville, go to the Biltmore House. It's so beautiful and fascinating. And anyway, so glad to hear that you've been there too. I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
definitely worth the price of admission. And
Yeah.
I mean, the house is fabulous too, of course, but from
I
a
don't
landscape
remember the
perspective,
house.
yeah,
To
so
be
fun.
honest. I remember the gardens. Like, I remember distinctly going to I don't think I knew. Actually, I think that's what happened. I didn't know that Frederick Law Olmsted had designed the gardens. And so when I went out to the rose garden,
Mm,
that is very formal French garden style with
mhm.
that beautiful greenhouse towards the back, I saw the plaque and I was like, look at all these views. Before then, I was like, look at this view. This view is so perfectly framed. Who did this? And then I see the plaque. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Frederick Law Olmsted.
Uh-huh.
And it was like such a cool moment of just like, wow, like this is what we get to do as
Mhm.
landscape architects. And that's what, Frederick Law Olmsted did, I would imagine, without all this CAD. He went in and drew by hand these designs.
Yeah, I can't
With
even
his
imagine.
hands.
So massive.
And how precise,
Mhm.
how pristine, how precise, how clean, how organic, and it just there's no excuse, I feel like when when we're designing stuff on the computer, you can really create beautiful designs by hand.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about you being a landscape designer. Do you think there's a difference between being a landscape architect versus being a landscape designer? And do you swing on the pendulum, as far as like staying a landscape designer always or being a landscape architect that's important kind of thing?
No, that's a great question. I think there's definitely a lot of overlap. And again, sometimes I have a bit of imposter syndrome since I am not a registered landscape architect. No, it's not my degree. But I think it Basically boils down to the technical aspect of it is what I'm licensed to do. I think both of us can obviously design residential spaces on a grand scale. I think at least here in South Carolina, I'm not licensed to draw technical construction drawings. It might even be like the footing of a wall. I don't know if I'm licensed to tell a builder how to build something. So the way I get around that is my contractor, my list of recommended contractors, the guys that I know and respect, I have seen their work and I know that they know how to build a proper footing for a wall. And I'm not building walls over 4 feet tall that have to have an engineer stamp on them. If we need something taller, we can terrace it. So I am building or drawing my 2D designs. Sometimes if I need to do like an elevation or a section just to show here's the retaining wall, especially pools can get really complicated with if it's a sloped site, really understanding like, where the elevation of that pool deck is in relation to the house and the rest of the yard. So I can draw sections to elevations, and then I am trusting the contractor to build it, knowing that they do this all the time. They do this for a living. And also understanding too that I will do absolute the best I can to have an accurate base plan and get all my trees sited, but also understanding that what we are doing, we are handing them a 2D design for a 3D site. There will have to be, decisions that have to be made on site. Maybe this plant isn't going to go exactly here. I might have to scoot over 6 inches because there was a root under the ground that I obviously didn't see when I was drawing it. So just helping the homeowner and the contractor understand that I trust you to keep the integrity of the design, but I also give you the freedom to make minor adjustments as needed on site, since it is a 3D landscape that they're, creating off of a 2D design.
That's so true. Yeah. When it comes to like construction details, I feel like at times you have to go to the site and understand how it's being built and see it being built in 3D first before going and putting it into, a detail sheet. And I don't go and see that construction happening. I don't know what a footing looks like. I don't know what are the materials that are needed to, so I think the fact that you're able to communicate to the contractor, trust the contractor to build it well, and then you're just communicating what the design intention is as clearly as possible. And then they're the ones that execute that. It is a different, we're talking different scale. So you're doing residential versus I've worked on shopping centers, and you should have a license for doing that technical construction drawing. Like I think you're expected to as a student, as a young professional to like, you need to learn this. And it's never seen a construction site before.
Right. That's a good point.
So, but yeah, I think for you, what I'm more inspired by is just how self-taught you are. You seem to have just this knack to be able to learn something and roll with it in your business. So kudos to you on that, because it's scary starting a small business, and you did it with kids and all these life transitions.
Thank you. I know one of the questions you sent was what's the hardest part? I think the hardest part of running your own business is just all the different hats you have to wear. I love the design process. I love getting to know people and listening to them and creating spaces for them. But I hate sending invoices and proposals and estimates. And
Yeah.
I think that stuff that I haven't found a seamless way to outsource things that are pain points. Instead, I have just tended to buy hardware type of things. Instead of hiring an assistant, I bought a printer. So now I don't have to pay someone to run to the print shop for me. I got a zip level to help me do site analysis. So I'll buy tools that help me make my site analysis. I mean, you got to admit, it kind of sucks. It's probably the least.
Yes.
I would rather send an invoice than do a site analysis. It's important. You can't skip it. It's important for me to be there and understand the site, but it is hard to do by yourself, and it's tedious, and it's either hot or cold or buggy or there's snakes or mosquitoes. And so, yeah, I've just bought tools that help me do it as most efficiently as possible. Oh, one other thing that's interesting, I found this software. It's not software. It's a website, Nearmap, and it's a subscription, but it's super high resolution satellite imagery. And especially here on the East Coast where we have massive trees, and that's kind of a con. But actually in the winter, sometimes you can sight those big trees using that satellite imagery. So it's been so helpful and helps me do a really good base plan because I can find their house. I can take a screenshot of that and then draw their driveway and their sidewalks and cite their big trees. And it has been so helpful. And so when I'm on site doing those measurements, I know I've already looked at the picture online and I know that I can get this driveway from that image instead of having to measure every curve of the driveway and doing triangulation and like trying to measure it that way. I can just like measure the footprint of the house. And anyway, it helps me be more efficient in the site analysis by paying for things that help me gather information from other places than just measuring. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, I have to do, I mean, I'm not in land, I don't have my own business, but having and buying the tools that will help you expedite the process. There are tools that can help you do things faster and more accurately and can inform the design process a little bit better because it's just hard when you have, like you said, going out to the site, going window, wall, corner,
Yeah.
head,
Yeah.
and time is money, you know,
Mhm.
which is huge. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for just agreeing to be on the podcast and talking with me. I've learned a lot from you. And again, listeners, go to that Domestika course. It's landscape design, right? It's principles on
And I think it's called Introduction to Landscape Design.
introduction.
All right. And my
Yes.
other little 30-minute spiel of that. So they reached out to me about a year and a half ago. And at first I thought it was a scam because they were asking me to fly to Madrid. But then I looked them up and realized how legit they were. And it's basically like masterclass for the creative industry. And so I spent like 6 months writing the curriculum. And then I flew to Madrid, which is insane.
Wow.
And they had set up a whole studio just for my class. And they recorded it for a week. I sat in the studio and went through lesson by lesson by lesson. And they had like I was so impressed by their professionalism and by the product that they produced. And then they spent like 6 months editing it and making me actually sound professional and putting all the graphics together. And it's a really interesting business model. Instead of they translate it into 15 different languages.
Wow.
And it's a very low price point. It's less than $10. And you have all these downloadable resources. Don't think that I have made a ton of money off this. I haven't. I knew going into it. I read the contract. I basically got a trip to Madrid, which was amazing. And got to have this opportunity. I am not rolling in the cash from this, but I'm very proud of what they created. And I'm so thankful that I'm able to share it with a lot of people. And yeah, and thank you for taking it. I really appreciate that. Even as already you're a landscape architect, you so did not need this course, but
no,
thank you for signing up and taking it. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, it was totally like not I'm an intro landscape designer. You know, it's for me it's more of just a learning opportunity to learn more about you and how you view the world and also learning people's tips and tricks and how they get to do all the beautiful designs that they do. So thank you so much for taking all that time. You know, 6 months is a long time to prepare a lesson, but you did a fantastic job. So thank you so much. And
yeah, thanks for having me on. It was so nice to get to know you better. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this insightful exploration of the intersection between art and landscape design. If you found inspiration in Pearce's insights, be sure to follow her on Instagram at PearceBDesigns. And if you like this episode, subscribe to the Greenside Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Your support keeps these stories flourishing. If you'd like to contribute to the growth of our podcast, consider supporting us on Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description below. Your generosity fueled our passion for uncovering the stories behind the landscapes that shape our world. Connect with us on social media for updates on upcoming episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and more on Instagram at The Greenside Podcast. As we conclude this episode, remember that each landscape is a canvas, a unique piece of art waiting to be explored. Thank you for being part of our community, and until next time, keep embracing the beauty that surrounds you. See ya!